summer-themed series. And we have lots of exciting things for you this summer, as usual. Before I start introducing our lovely speaker, I'd like to say that our sponsors tonight are Dr. Joe and Francis Bachman. We really do thank them. That's a great thing. And we also have another group of people who have contributed in honor of the Wasserberg 65th wedding anniversary. Yes. Lucille Chaffee, Althea Portnoy, Mary Ellen Borio, and Dave Hathaway. So, and happy anniversary. Our speaker tonight is Laura Fiser, and she is the curator of collections and exhibitions at the Payne Art Center in Oshkosh. She has a BA in art history from Davidson College in North Carolina, an MA in art history also from the University of Cincinnati. She has spent almost 8 years at the Payne. Previous to that, she was at the Speed Art Museum in Louisville. So I, without further ado, present you.
Can you hear me? I think I'm turned on. Thank you so much for a nice introduction. And can everyone in the back hear me? I'll put it up higher too. That might help. Thank you so much for having me tonight. Winchester Academy Board, thank you for inviting me. This is one of my favorite audiences. So when I told my boss where I was going today, I was trying to get the laptop from his office closet, and he said, well, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to Wapaka. And he goes, oh, you love them, don't you? I said, I do. This is my third visit to Wapaka to speak with the Winchester Academy program, and every time it's been terrific. I was here fall of 2006 to speak about Tiffany, and in early 2009 to speak about Frederick Remington, and tonight I have the honor and pleasure of sharing with you the work of a fantastic 21st century artist, Dale Chihuly. So he's very much a household name, but hopefully I'll give you some juicy tidbits and some behind-the-scenes information about our current exhibition at the Payne of Chihuly's work, and it'll be a great eye candy experience, as we say. You don't even need me, we just need the visuals, because truly the beauty and artistry speaks for itself. I'm wondering if we could dim the lights a little. I don't need it completely dark, but I think that'll be great. Is that okay with everybody? If you ever can't hear or see, just flag me down. So how many of you have visited the Payne before in Oshkosh? Oh, I love it. Absolutely great. I sometimes ask that question and I'll get two hands, and they're thinking, I've never understood what it is. But in a nutshell, for those of you who don't know, our official name is the Payne Art Center and Gardens. We sometimes go by just the Payne. But we are a 1920s historic estate built by Nathan and Jessie Kimberly Payne. And we view ourselves as three institutions rolled into one. We are a historic house museum, so we preserve the 1920s estate. We're on the National Historic Register, so you can have a wonderful historic house museum visit, learn about Mr. and Mrs. Payne and their tastes. And then we are also an art museum, so we have an art collection that we manage, about 3,000 objects ranging from fine art to archival materials like architectural drawings, all the original plans for the institution. And we also host, as part of a major component of our mission, changing art exhibitions. So that's why I'm here to talk about Chihuly tonight. That's one of our current initiative is Chihuly Glass. And next summer we have a fantastic Matisse exhibition coming up, so we're excited about that. And we have numerous events that typical art museums have, art fairs and art shows, so a great place to see changing art exhibitions. And then we're also a botanical garden, and we have 3.5 landscaped acres on our property, and then we also maintain a prairie woodland across the street that not many people know about, and numerous other green spaces. So at the tail end of the talk, if I have time, I will touch on our recent construction project that completed a few months ago, because a lot of people will ask me about that, and I hate for it to get missed along the way. But Chihuly is certainly the main focus tonight. And here we have Chihuly Venetians. Our current exhibition, it opened May 11th and is on view until October 13th. It is one of the longest exhibitions we've ever been able to host, and it's all from the private collection of Mr. George Strimple, who lives in Lake Oswego, Oregon. He is a private collector of glass and also American painting, and he has so generously let us have his collection on view for almost 6 months. Part of the deal was that we had to be ready to accept it in January, so it's been tying up my storage facility in 120 large boxes. And I'll talk about that a little later, because people love the nuts and bolts of all of this. But because we were willing to store it, we could have it for a double booking, which is very important to us, because word of mouth travels a little slowly. So people procrastinate and wait until the end. Don't wait until October to see the show. It'll be jam-packed. But you'll notice the Travel Wisconsin logo in the corner of the screen. And I should mention that we were very fortunate to receive a marketing grant of $28,000 from the State of Wisconsin Tourism Department to market the Chihuly exhibition across the state and also in the Chicago, Minneapolis markets. And so you'll see us on the TV and commercials and things of that nature, lots of print advertising and lots of web initiatives as well. So that's the type of grant. We actually match the funds, so we end up spending between our own donations and in-kind donations about $70,000 marketing the exhibition, and in turn the economic impact of people traveling to Oshkosh directly for the sole purpose of seeing the exhibition is pretty phenomenal, and the money that they spend while they're in town. So we do a lot to gauge economic impact, and the arts do have a very important impact. Here is a view of our art gallery. The exhibition is on view in our main gallery at the Payne, and opened just a few weeks ago, and it's truly spectacular. This view does not do it justice. Many of these works of art don't photograph well. Glass is very tricky to photograph, so I encourage you all to come and see it in person. And when I'm finished or taking questions at the end, you'll need to check about the first 5 rows, because that was all that was set when I got here. You'll need to check under your seat. And if you have, there are 2 seats that have a yellow Post-it note with Chihuly written on the underside. And if they're still stuck under there, I have an envelope for each of you with 2 passes. So come see me. I think we're looking around this area for one and right around this area for the other. So find the 2 Post-its, and you too can come to the Payne free of charge and see this exhibition. The highlight of the exhibition, which I'll talk about in detail in a little bit, is the Laguna Murano chandelier. And that is the work of art that's in the center, and it is a 1,500-piece of glass chandelier with 2 hanging elements and 3 floor components. So everything on that center platform is considered one work of art, and it's the Laguna Murano chandelier. And that is the highlight of the exhibition, but there's certainly much more to see. Chihuly Venetians, our exhibition, features 47 vessels, 12 drawings, and 1 monumental 5-part chandelier, which I mentioned, all by Dale Chihuly, America's most celebrated glass artist. And so who was Chihuly? Well, his name is very common, and a lot of people say, what is that? They hear people throwing the name around, but it is his last name, his real last name. Dale Chihuly was born in 1941 in Tacoma, Washington, so he was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and that is where he lives today. He has a very prolific, influential studio of glass blowing and in Seattle, Washington, and you can go there now, and you can't access the studio unless you're with a private group. It's called the Boathouse, but you can now visit at the Space Needle. They opened Chihuly Garden and Glass, so there is a permanent display and exhibition in Seattle of Chihuly's work, so that's where you can see most of it, but there are exhibitions like ours currently on view and other exhibitions around the world of his work. As I mentioned, he was born in 1941 to George Chihuly and Viola Magnuson Chihuly, and he and his mother were very close. He had an older brother, one sibling, who died in 1957 in a Naval Air Force training accident, and then his father passed away in 1958 of a heart attack, so his mother went to work to support them, and Chihuly was extremely close to her. He was introduced to glass blowing while studying interior design at the University of Washington in Tacoma. And after he graduated in 1965, he actually came to Wisconsin. And I'll mention that in just a moment. But in 1961, while he was at University of Washington receiving his undergraduate degree, that is when he learned to melt and fuse glass. And in 1963, he took a weaving class and incorporated glass strands into his weaving. And his degree, as I said, was in interior design. And he, from an early age, was showing an interest in architectural space and interiors and how artwork affected those spaces and how the artwork was affected by the spaces that it was installed in. And so all of that interest in space and interiors is certainly, and architecture is certainly evident in much of his work today. You can see his family there. He's the youngest, and then his sibling who died is there in the yellow striped shirt. Dale Chihuly is known for wearing very bright colors much of the time, so I love the photo of him as a child with the red hat on. He often can be seen in red shirts or red pants and brightly colored clothing. Now in photographs you primarily see him with an eye patch because he had an accident in the 1970s and he was blind. He lost vision in one eye and lost all depth perception, which is quite dangerous for glass blowing. Sure, the next year he dislocated his shoulder in an accident, so he actually uses a team to blow glass, and he views himself more as director or choreographer than musician or dancer. And he said he liked the view better from afar and directing it all. Here are some other early photographs of him from the 1960s and early 70s. So he started incorporating glass in his weavings, and then in 1965 he graduated from University of Washington with his undergraduate degree, and he came to UW-Madison. And UW-Madison is where he enrolled in the country's first glass art program. And I'm not sure if any of you saw the exhibition last year at the Chazen Museum of Art in Madison, but it was celebrating the 50th anniversary of the birth of the Studio Glass program. And that was when UW-Madison, under Harvey Littleton, who had been a chemist and had made vessels for all of the chemists in the department out of glass, he founded the country's first glass art program. And so that initiated what we call the studio art glass movement. And it's viewing glass as an art form, as an expressive sculptural medium. That's what we mean by studio glass, as opposed to just merely utilitarian or functional. It goes far beyond glasses for drinking out of or vases for holding flowers. So glass as a sculptural medium. And Chihuly enrolled at UW-Madison under Harvey Littleton and studied there. And Harvey Littleton was a very important glass artist because he encouraged all of those early students to then go out and found their own glass art programs at other schools. So Chihuly actually continued his studies after UW-Madison at the Rhode Island School of Design, known as RISD, a very important art school and design school in Rhode Island. And he established the glass program there and taught there for more than a decade. Here you see him at RISD in the upper left, and then two photos I'll mention that are important in his stepping stones in his career. The top center is Chihuly in Venice, and then the bottom image is Chihuly in the area where Pilchuck Glass School was founded in Washington State, and then Chihuly blowing glass in Madison on the right-hand side. He had first started experimenting with glass in those tapestries during undergraduate, and in 1965, he started experimenting in his own basement studio with glass. And he wrote, "One night in 1965, I melted a few pounds of stained glass in one of my kilns and dipped a steel pipe from the basement into it. I blew into the pipe and a bubble of glass appeared. I had never seen glass blowing before. My fascination for it probably comes in part from discovering the process that night by accident. From that moment, I became obsessed with learning all I could about glass. And to this day, he remains utterly obsessed with glass." Some of his early work incorporated neon, as you see above in the left, and glass, very experimental in the 1960s and 70s. He also worked on installations, kind of including the environment and interiors with his glassmaking. And then he started edging into the vessel forms in the early 1970s. And you see there his cylinder series in the upper right, and then Persian sea forms in the lower level. He's always been inspired by the natural world. You can see that in his sea forms, and very much inspired by natural forms, ancient glass, everything that he can see in the world around him. I'm actually going to go back to that one. In 1968, the Venice image, he received a Fulbright Fellowship, which enabled him to travel to Venice for a year. And Venice is the home of glass-blowing traditions. And he went to work at the Venini glass factory in Venice on the island of Murano, where all of the glass factories are based. And since medieval times, the glass-blowing traditions in Italy have been based on the island of Murano. And they've held very tightly closed doors and secrets in terms of innovations and techniques. They're all very isolated factories, and they have maestros or masters who have apprenticed there over the years and excelled in their technique and mastered techniques in glass blowing. And so they gain a status, and then all the apprentices work under them. And they really are just very exclusive factories. And Chihuly had a lot of trouble getting his foot in the door as a 20-some-year-old American artist. So he wrote letters to all of the factories whose addresses were listed, and he kind of did cold calls trying to get his foot in the door in Murano. And only one, the Venini glass factory, responded. So that is where he did his apprenticeship. And he made a name for himself early on, not only because of his perseverance, but also because of his creativity. He was very bold. He didn't shy away when they asked him for ideas on how to execute a chandelier project or some other project. He made sure that he voiced his ideas, and they were often very well thought out. So he apprenticed there for a year, and there on the island of Murano is where he observed the team approach to blowing glass. Instead of an individual artist that was kind of the mode of operation in the United States, they would actually collaborate and not necessarily sign a name to a piece. And it was critical to his approach, that team approach to glass blowing. if you've ever seen artists blowing glass, it's a very physical, involved process. And so often, in order to create large-scale works, they had to collaborate. It's almost impossible to do it on your own. So in 1971, Chihuly went to the Pacific Northwest, and there you see him below with his friend and co-founder of the Pilchuck Glass School. And they founded Pilchuck Glass School and based it on those Murano techniques of teamwork and collaboration. And it became an international glass center. It still is today. It's about an hour north of Seattle. And there at Pilchuck, Chihuly and his colleagues have led the avant-garde in the development of glass as a fine art. Again, early works. So he started working in the vessel form early on. And over the past 4 decades, beginning with his fellowship in Venice in 1968, and pretty much ever since and through today, Chihuly has taken those centuries-old glass-making traditions to an entirely new level of innovation, spectacle, grandeur, and artistry. So it's gone far beyond just mere decorative vessels or utilitarian vessels, and he's worked to create glass sculptures that are environments and architectural feats of innovation. Large-scale installations like you see in the lower left at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. There he is in the upper left, glass blowing with his assistants and what he calls gaffers. That's his chief glass blower is a gaffer. In the upper left, one of his Persian forms. A wonderful chandelier in the center over the canals in Venice, and I'll talk about that project since it's obviously related. And then his famous boats that are filled with glass tendrils and balls and horns. He creates a lot of works outside and gardens. So that piece is actually in the Missouri Botanic Gardens in St. Louis. And then he's done a lot of projects in the desert. The museum, I can't remember the exact name, the Botanic Garden in Phoenix, Arizona, the Desert Museum, a large-scale chandelier. So these are not actually functioning chandeliers. They are not electrical, they're not lit, but they are certainly light-filled because of the sunlight and the glass, and relate so beautifully to their setting. Chihuly is perhaps best known today for his international architectural and garden projects, such as those I just showed and these shown here, and featuring these breathtaking glass chandeliers and very elaborate sculptural installations. And obviously, a single artist could not do this by his or herself. You would have to have a team, not only in the blowing of all of these glass elements and creating them, but also in the installation, the structural armatures that they have to be installed on, and also the physical hanging of them in the spaces. So you see there on the bottom a Persian ceiling with Persian forms. Then the upper image is a chandelier at the Victoria and Albert Museum and the Rotunda in London. And then many of his outdoor installation projects. That's the Chihuly Garden and Glass in Seattle by the Space Needle that you see on the right. But truly taking glass to an entirely new world. And his mind is always thinking of what's next? What could we do better? What could I do to outdo the last project? A dire sense of competition and creativity. Here is his boathouse and studio in Seattle. He purchased this in the early 1990s. He always wanted to be on the water in Seattle, and so his dream came true. He has an actual houseboat, so that's why it's called the boathouse, and it's on the water. And believe it or not, that's his lap pool. Wouldn't you like to swim laps? On the left there, with the glass installed on the bottom of the pool so he can swim laps over those Persian forms and baskets. There he is in his drawing and painting studio in the upper right. Drawing and painting, he calls them all drawings. I think he likes the expressive connotation of drawing. They're very gestural. I'll show a few of those later, but there he is creating. He's constantly doing that. He does not participate in the glass blowing activity himself anymore due to his injuries over the year, but he is definitely there directing the process, and it's his expressive design. And then the entryway to the boathouse with another Persian ceiling. A lot of people ask if the ceiling at Bellagio in Las Vegas is Chihuly's, and indeed it is. And it's that similar Persian style ceiling. Chihuly has created more than a dozen renowned series of vessels and sculptural glass. Some of the most famous are baskets, sea forms, macchia, which means spot in Italian, Persians, and many others. He often returns to each series over the years, continuing to rework the series and reinvent new forms and color schemes. So if he initiated or introduced a series in the early 1980s, he may revisit it in 2006 and create more forms. And he invites some of the world's best glass blowers and most creative glass artists to work with him on these series. So when you watch Chihuly DVDs or look at books, you'll see people in the studio with him working, and they have their own art careers all on their own. They're reputable artists, and they work with him to execute his vision, and they really enjoy it, that collaborative approach modeled after the island of Murano. And then they also are able together to take glass to a whole new level, much beyond what any of them could do on an individual basis. So sea forms are on the left, the baskets in the middle, and then Persians on the right, the bright green. And we have a couple of examples of those on view in our exhibition. Chihuly Venetians is focused at the pane. That's a different view of our gallery space, on one particular series of Chihuly's work, and it's his Venetian series. And it celebrates the artist's love of the city of Venice, its importance in his artistic development and his background in glass, and Venice's enduring artistic legacy. It's his favorite city, and it has certainly inspired a wealth of art forms, which you see here. All of these are included in our exhibition. This is not our installation. This image came from another museum, so people keep asking me, where's the brick wall at the pane? That's not at the pane, but these, our exhibition has traveled to 3 other venues before it came to us, so this is one of the installation shots from Colorado. Chihuly's Venetians are very intricately formed, as you can see here, and brilliantly colored vessels inspired by Art Deco Venetian glass. And Chihuly, when he went to Venice initially in 1968, he continued to travel back to Venice on numerous occasions. And in 1988, he traveled there and had an opportunity to visit a private collection. And he wrote about this visit and how important it was in his career. And right after this visit to Venice is when he started his Venetian series in 1988 in the fall. And he mentions in this quote that I'm going to read you an artist named Lino Talia Pietra. And Lino Talia Pietra is today, and has been for many years, considered the best glass blower in the world. And he grew up on the island of Murano and became a maestro himself by age 21. And he is indeed the best glass blowing artist in the world. So that's who it means when I say Lino. He's referring to Lino Talia Pietra. Chihuly wrote, I visited Venice and I saw a great collection of Art Deco Venetian glass in a Venetian palazzo that I'd never seen before. They were unlike any I had ever seen in books or museums. They were very odd, with garish colors. Most were classical shapes with beautiful handles and other unusual additions. I was stunned at how unbelievably innovative and beautiful these pieces from the 1920s and 30s were. I thought when Lino came next summer to Seattle, I would have him make these for me. I would pretend that I was a designer in the 1920s and make these eccentric pieces with reds and blacks and golds and greens and handles. After a couple of days working with Lino, the pieces became much more involved. It wasn't long before something started to happen. And here they are working together on the Venetian series. He said, "It opened first in the drawings. Around the 4th or 5th day, I started to make bold drawings in charcoal. The series started a drastic change from rather refined classical shapes to very bizarre pieces. Handles changed to knots, fronts became claws, colors went from subtle to bright, big leaves and feathers appeared." And there he is with Lino. Those photos are actually from 2 years later, but they continued to work on the Venetian series together. And Lino is the gentleman with his tongue out on the right-hand side of the photo, and then the gentleman in the blue in the second photo. And this collaboration between the Italians and the Americans was very groundbreaking. And the fact that Chihuly was able to break down those barriers and partner with the world's greatest glassblower from Murano is truly remarkable. So the Venetian series feature very vibrant, sometimes discordant color combinations, very unusual forms. As he mentioned, they started off as kind of classical shaped, elegant vessel-type forms, and then they immediately started reflecting Chihuly's own very dynamic, expressive style, and started to explore numerous types of shapes and forms. The handles became ribbons, fronts, which are decorative elements, sometimes just flat circles on the surface of a vase, become spikes and claws or little swizzle sticks like that central vase. And so they quickly developed a mind of their own almost. They took on a whole new life under Chihuly's direction. A year after that, in 1989, Chihuly started the Putti Venetian series, which is within the Venetian series, but it's called the Putti Venetians. And Putti, it's P-U-T-T-I, are these cherub-type figures. And as I said, it's so hard to photograph glass, but you can see them in that yellow vase. And these are quite large vessels. They're actually much more than just little vases. They're sculptures in glass. And the Putti figures are toddler boys. They were used in Renaissance and Baroque art in wood and plaster decoration on buildings, in frescoes and murals, painted. Not quite angelic forms, but sort of Cupid-type figures. And they're very joyful and supposed to be very playful and add a touch of whimsy to the work. And Chihuly began the Putti series just a year after he started the Venetian series. And he was looking for a way to bring even further collaboration. So the blown glass component of the vase type form, or the vessel, was blown by Lino Talia Pietra. And then Chihuly invited Pino Signoretto, seen here, the world's greatest sculptor in glass. He sculpts hot molten glass to create the Putti figures and other forms that are then fused to the surface of the vase. And Pino Signoretto takes hot molten glass that's about the consistency of honey, and while it's still moldable, he pinches and pulls and creates these amazing figures. And it truly is a thing to behold, to watch him make those. We have a DVD on view at the Pane, and you can actually see that process taking place of him pinching and pulling the Putti figures. So the Putti Venetians, we have 13 of those on view, show that collaboration between Pino Signoretto, Lino Talia Pietra, and Chihuly. And they are unbelievable works of art and include a lot of fantastic details. The Pootie figures, dragons. Sometimes the Pootie look devilish. They almost look like self-portraits of Chihuly, which he has not denied. And I think he is a bit of a mischievous character himself, and so that's how he really enjoyed adding the Pootie to his work. He wrote about the Pootie. I don't really quite remember how the Pootie idea came. I was up at Pilchuck, and I conspired to get Pino Signoretto and Lino Talia Pietra to work together on the same piece, something that simply would never happen in Murano. So I made a design that Lino would blow and Pino would make the Pootie, and we would put them together, all these different ways that the Pootie could look, sit, and play. And they do add a wonderful sense of whimsy. There's an upside-down Pootie, a detail from a vase in our exhibition. This one is, again, as good a photo as anybody can get, but it's a sunflower with a Pootie figure with devil horns. So who knows what he's up to, but they are really remarkable works of art. And then these three central vessels are enormous vases, true feats of glass blowing talent. They're called bottle stoppers, and they were inspired by Venetian Art Deco perfume bottles, which are, of course, quite tiny and have stoppers. And so what Chihuly often likes to do is play with scale. If he sees something teeny tiny like a perfume bottle, he thinks, hey, I wonder if Lino, Pino, and I can make it big and monumental. So that is what the bottle stoppers are, and we have those three on view. It's Pootie in the hand, and the Pootie are playing musical instruments. Pootie and the dragon in the center, and Pootie in the tree on the right-hand side. And when I've gotten glass artists and experts together in the gallery to see those three pieces, they are amazed by the technical skill and the artistry, and they have said that only those three artists could ever create those works of art. That for anyone else, it would be dangerous, they'd break. They're truly unbelievable works of art. There you can see them a little bit closer. They have wonderful bubbles and variations in color, the pink and the almost translucent, and then the golden amber color. They put baking soda in the mix when they're blowing so that it gases off and creates a wonderful variety of bubbles. And then, I don't know if I made this clear, but the tops are what Pino Signoretto sculpts. So you imagine that hot molten glass, and he's pinching and pulling, sometimes creating the head separately and then fusing it on. But he created the tops, Lino blew the bottoms, and then they worked together to assemble them. The Piccolo Venetians developed just a couple years later. And piccolo, does anybody know what that means in Italian? Small, very small, that is right. The piccolo Venetians are small vessels. And we have a series of nearly 40 of those on view, and they are absolutely so exuberant. The Venetian series quickly went from recognizable functional pieces to completely over-the-top sculptural works of art with wild personalities. Chihuly wrote about the initiation of the Piccolo series, and he said, the big Venetians are such a technical tour de force. You're limited to what you can do if you are working in this huge scale. There's a lot of things you can't do. It's just too big to handle. We, meaning he and Lino, were working so big we were sort of restricting ourselves. I decided we'd go all the way back and make them small again. I call them the Piccolo Venetians. And by making them small, they could explore all of that ornamentation. All of the ornament that's fused to the outside, the flowers, the coils, the stylized lilies and the leaves, the spikes, which are those circular prunts that have become like claws. All of that is called bit work. So they're small bits of ornamentation that they're creating and fusing to the surface. And they would not have been able to do that on such a large scale. So going small again allowed him a lot of creativity and to create such amazing pieces inspired by those 1920s and 30s vessels you saw. Here's a beautiful one. It is absolutely tiny but magnificent, called a lavender piccolo Venetian with cerulean lilies. So I love the descriptions. And those are all from 1993 and 1994. And you can see we've installed them on shelves in the exhibition, and they're kind of scattered throughout. But they are wonderful, and everybody seems to want to pick their favorite, and they tease me and say, well, this is the one I'm going to take home. I'm thinking, oh, yeah. That makes me a little nervous, but they are firmly waxed to the shelves, so hopefully none will go missing. But I think people can imagine having them in their homes. They're of a scale that's much more approachable than the bottle stoppers. As you could see in that gallery installation shot, we also have on view drawings by Chihuly, and he creates these himself. We have 12 drawings from the Venetian series. They're quite large scale, and they seem to be a real crowd favorite. People are so drawn to these. They're just beautifully colored. They have a very spontaneous style to them, yet they are finely executed, and they really are magnificent works of art. And you can see how they serve as blueprints for the glass blowers to bring the designs to life. And in some cases, you can see a natural affinity. And Chihuly, as you saw in that boathouse image, creates hundreds and hundreds of these drawings in his studio. And the Venetian series, he has said, most closely matches what what they actually create in glass. It has the most direct relationship or parallel. And it's fun to see those pairings together in the gallery. And as I mentioned, the centerpiece of the exhibition, this is again from another venue, but we have it on view, is the Laguna Murano chandelier. And this is a magnificent work of art that's almost hard to describe, so you must all come see it in person. Chihuly got his start with his very famous chandeliers in the early 1990s. And he had been in a restaurant in Barcelona, and there was a chandelier that was installed at eye level while you were dining. And he loved that idea of something that was way up high usually, and you kind of have to see it from afar, something that's brought down, and you can almost immerse yourself in the beauty of the crystals and the glass and the light. And he had been so caught up in the idea of chandeliers in Venice, but they were always functional. They were either candlelit or electric lit or gas lit. And so he thought, well, they don't have to be functional at all. They can be sculptural works of art. So he started working on chandeliers for an exhibition at the Seattle Art Museum in 1992. So this is his very first chandelier. And it's individual pieces of glass that are blown and then assembled in place. It doesn't travel as one entity. It's always taken apart and re-put back together. And that is what we had going on at the Paine a few weeks ago, is putting together the chandelier. In 1995, he had, just 3 years after he started making chandeliers, he had a terrific idea. Chihuly's always thinking of these enormous projects that I doubt anyone else could pull off, but he assembles a team of ready and willing participants to work on these enormous projects. And in 1995, he started Chihuly over Venice, and he wrote about this project, and he said, I was dreaming that wouldn't it be great to take the chandeliers to Venice, where the tradition of chandeliers comes from? I thought I would pick countries with great glass traditions in different parts of the world and make chandeliers in each of those countries. I decided I would go to glassworks in Finland, Ireland, and Mexico with no preconceived ideas. The results would be impossible to predict, and each chandelier blow would be unlike any other. we would break down the cultural barriers and dispel the secrets that have so long restricted and insulated the great glass houses. In the end, the chandeliers, made from thousands of individual parts and representing the works of hundreds of glass blowers, would be sent to Venice, the wizard of the sea, the most mysterious and secret city of all. And so he went to these places around the world, worked with teams of glass blowers to create glass, and then assembled chandeliers in and over the canals of Venice, which you see here. He also created a magnificent one for the Ducal Palace, and this was on view in the city of Venice in the early fall of 1995, and then, early part of late 1995 and all the way through until early fall 1996. And a magnificent, very overwhelming project and celebrating his love of the city of Venice. So then he decided, wouldn't it be fantastic and amazing to create a chandelier in Venice, begin it in Venice, and then finish it in Seattle. And that is the Laguna Murano chandelier. And it is the one and only chandelier, the one that we have on view at the Payne, that he ever started on the island of Murano and then completed in Seattle. No other chandelier has been worked on in Venice. And so here he is with Lino and Pino. They're in Pino Signoretto's glass blowing studio on the island of Murano, and they're creating blown glass elements and sculpted elements for this magnificent Laguna Murano chandelier. And it was created in 1996 at the end of the year, that fall, after Chihuly over Venice closed. And it is comprised of over 1,500 individual pieces of glass. And it's a little bit difficult to see exactly what I'm talking about, but amongst all of this confetti of tendrils and sea of horns and ribbons are sculptural elements, those opalescent off-white orbs. There are 8 of them, and those were the parts that were begun on the island of Murano. And then the glass balls that are kind of nestled within were also created there. And then all the other pieces were created at the boathouse in Seattle. And it's called the Laguna Murano chandelier. And does anyone know why it's called Laguna Murano? Anybody know what that means? Laguna, it sounds like lake. That's right. The lagoon that surrounds the island of Murano. And while this looks completely abstract at first, with all that tendrils and horns and ribbons, within those sculptural elements is fantastic sea life forms. And it was all inspired by the lagoon that surrounds Venice and the island of Murano. And here you see sharks. There's also, let's see, on one of the hanging elements is King Neptune of the sea with his sea horn, his shell. There's a mermaid on the other hanging element. And jellyfish, octopus, this is an eel that curls around the top. So all of these fantastic sea life forms were sculpted by Pino Signoretto on Murano. The octopus, a flounder. There's also a wonderful puffer fish that might be my favorite, a sea turtle, and they're all nestled within the chandelier. And they are very opalescent and shine kind of different colors of pinks and lavender. And because of the unique collaboration on the island of Murano between the American glass artist Chihuly, the American master, and the 2 Italian masters, the leading glass blower and the leading glass sculptor, many critics consider this chandelier to be the most significant and important chandelier Chihuly has ever created. And I must tell you, when I was like you, sitting in an audience or sitting at my computer looking at digital images, I thought it was really fantastic. But I also thought that it had a sort of menacing quality about it. It looked wild. It almost looked like snakes in the photos and things like that. And what the photos failed to capture is the incredible beauty of the piece. It is absolutely one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And in early May, we had a team from Seattle come to install the chandelier and assemble it. And one of the most fascinating aspects of this chandelier is that every single time it's installed, it's a different work of art. And it's intentionally so. So the sculptural elements stay in the same spots each time. And there are 5 armatures. They're steel, and they look like, you'll see them in a minute, but they look like bottle racks or something. And 2 hang and 3 are on the floor. And the sculptural components, the 8 of them, go in their particular spots. And then from there, the installation crew, who's been trained by Chihuly, composes the chandelier. So each time it's slightly different, and they work to create balance in terms of weight and form and color. And it is one of the most exciting things I've ever seen. It's just magic. You can see the hundreds of pieces of glass would go on the floor on moving blankets. It's actually quite scary. They did the 2 hanging components first. And then after they finished the hanging components, and the first hanging component is just out of the image, it was already up, they worked on that platform. The platform is, at the Payne, we are the first venue to ever install it on a platform, and we use black plexiglass in order to reflect the glass. It has a protective film on it in this image because it scratches easily. So after they were done completely, we peeled the surface off, and that's when you get the depth, and it accentuates the water effect of the lagoon that surrounds Murano. And it is absolutely wonderful to see in person. But you can see the bottle rack type components, the armatures. They're insanely heavy, a couple hundred pounds each. And so once you decide where it's going, it does not budge. And then they work on them one by one. And here the balls are actually wired on. On the others, they're just lightly notched on, which is quite scary. But you can see they wire in the sculptural elements. And I love all this behind the scenes stuff. We had 2 people from Seattle, a firm that works with Chihuly Studio. And then we had 2 fantastic guys from Wisconsin, from Regional Glass Blowers Studios. I called Mick Milan. If you've never had Mick talk, you should. He's a glass artist based in Pickett, Wisconsin. Some people call him the corn guy because he blows large glass ears of corn. And he's a farmer during the summer, glass artist by night and winter. And he lent me 2 of his studio assistants because who on earth knows how to handle glass? Well, had to call the expert. So the 4 of them worked on installing it and didn't even need me after day 1. They were in such good shape, and we should be proud here in Wisconsin, the Seattle guys who've installed this every step of the way, both in the Pacific Northwest and on the road. They said they were the best assistants they had ever had. So that was exciting. But there they are in the thick of it. It's a noisy process. They're rattling glass nonstop, trying to wedge it in there. It's a little nerve-wracking, and they said that they expect breakage each and every time. I'm going to go back because I want you to see that reflective surface now that I've talked about it. And that's not it, because, yeah, we'll just keep going. It really is one of the most incredible works of art. And believe it or not, the collector, Mr. Strimple, never, ever, ever has it on view. He has it in a warehouse, and I store it under a highway. But Mr. Strimple, very special things about Mr. Strimple is that he wants people like you and me to be able to see amazing works of art. So he collects studio glass. He's Chihuly's most important private collector. That's why we went to him to try to persuade him to lend. We found Mr. Strimple when Chihuly's studio really works on the big multi-million-dollar projects these days. Chihuly is not getting any younger, and they just do a select number of projects a year, but usually they're in the large markets, and the budgets for them well exceed $5 million. And so we went to Mr. Strimple, and they actually assembled an exhibition for us, with us in mind. And this is the first time that the chandelier has ever been on this type of surface. And so when you look into it, it's a little hard to tell, but you can see the underside of the chandeliers reflected. So it actually looks a little bit like water. These almost remind me of the kind of mid-range water, then the bottom of the lagoon, and then those are kind of the surface of the water, the hanging elements. But it is a magical effect and quite spectacular. Mr. Strimple has also very generously lent us, as a last-minute component, 40 exquisite Venetian-style goblets created by Lino Talia Pietra. So you can go upstairs at the Payne to our Gothic gallery and see examples of the most extraordinary handmade glass goblets that anyone can make in the world. All of that ornamentation done by hand by Lino's workshop, and you too can see why he's considered the best in the world, and that is what Chihuly calls him, is the best in the world. And those all come from Mr. Strimple's collection too. He made it possible for us to show them. He sent them to us 5 days before the exhibition opened. When I expressed regret that I said I really should have asked to borrow something for our Gothic gallery, and his curator said, "Well, what would you like?" And it's not every day that you encounter people as generous as that, so it's extraordinary. You can see some of the detail images here. They really are exquisite, and you can see a lot of that inspiration that Chihuly has gleaned. The fantastic forms of the vessels, all of the intricate ornamentation, very fanciful color combinations, and all of that detail on the surface of the work. The caning is magical. And then these fantastic creatures, the seahorses, their dragons, all of those traditionally Venetian forms that have then been taken into the late 20th, early 21st century, and very dynamic. Just in case people wonder, we had a big construction project at the Payne that I wanted to throw in here because everyone asks, and it is an exciting project. If you come this summer, it is open and you can see it. But this is our carriage house at the back of the property, and the Paynes would be horrified. We call it the carriage house because they would have had automobiles. So in the architectural plans, it's called the motor garage, but that doesn't sound nearly as romantic and fun. But this is the way it looked. That component on the right is the original carriage house. And we renovated the first floor. We also brought the second floor up to code because it had not been touched since the 1920s. A few bad renovations, but nothing fantastic. And then we decided to expand the carriage house and create the link in between and then the conservatory for events and programs on the left-hand side. And this is the first construction we have had on the property since the 1920s. So it's all done with historic preservation and historic mindfulness at the forefront. And it's exciting to have space to entertain our visitors, to have programs of all varieties for young and old. We can have brunches and dinners. We can have Easter egg hunts if the rain is bad. We have a rain date for event, a rain spot for events. This is the first floor of the carriage house. We made sure that all of the craftsmanship in the new construction lived up to the standards set by the 1920s mansion. So beautiful pollard oak, quarter sawn oak
paneling in the first floor of the carriage house. And then here is the conservatory set up for our Black Tie Gala, which was the opening event on December 1st. That's our annual ball, but it's a terrific multi-purpose space, and we've done lots of exciting things in it so far. And then outside those windows, we took over the spot that was our sunken formal garden. We acquired the property next door so that we can extend, and that property was actually originally owned by the Payne. It had been notched out and sold, so we now have a nice rectangular piece of property now. But out those doors is where the new formal garden will be. So that is what our next phase is to actually raise money and design a new formal garden. This is an artistic rendering. So that's the conservatory, that's the carriage house, the link in between. There's courtyards so that events can spill out onto the courtyard. And this just shows some ideas of what the landscaping will look like. Again, this is a computerized rendering, so it will be much more lush and not flat like that. But it shows the building, and then there will be low or canopied trees, and then ADA compliant ramps, water features, arbors, and pergolas, so lots of sun and shade. And there's another artistic rendering, computerized, so again, it's not as beautiful as it will be in person, but hopefully you'll see signs of things getting underway. And this is just a finishing garden image to remind you that not only do we have Chihuly, but we have great gardens this time of year as well. So thank you for letting me come, and I am happy to take questions. Yes?
What's the current age of the three artists that you've referenced?
The current age, let's see, Chihuly is in his early 70s, and I believe Lino Talia Pietra is as well. He could be more 60s, late 60s, and Pino Signoretto, I think, is early 60s.
How can he do things in the 20s and 30s?
Oh, they did not create. I probably should have clarified. I always get new questions that then make me realize I need to clarify. They did not create those 1920s and 30s vessels. They were created by unknown artists in Italian workshops, but they were inspired. And that quote from Chihuly is a little confusing. He wanted Lino to help him make a new series of Venetians that is inspired by what Lino saw in the workshops and in private collections, and then they would make Venetian-style vessels. Because he'd never worked, he'd met the Italians before and worked with them at Pilchuck, but he'd never made his own series with them before. Yes?
When I was in St. Louis, down at their art museum a couple of years ago, Chihuly had things all around the main art museum outdoors.
Right.
It was a beautiful, beautiful walk. Huge displays of gorgeous art all along the pathway. It was, I had never seen any of that.
And I know, I'm curious how all of these places insure the glass outside, because he does a lot of outdoor projects. And I can't imagine they're durable enough, but they do them, and they're really magnificent. I've seen a couple of the outdoor ones, and I know he did a big project in St. Louis, and just magnificent.
Beautiful presentation and nice work. One big question is, how do you keep it all dusted?
Oh, well, funny you should ask. One of my coworkers came up to my desk today, and I am very much tucked in the top corner of the mansion. Most people can't even really see my computer screen. And stuck on the computer monitor is a big Post-it, and it says, "Dust Chihuly." And she said, I hesitate to even ask what that means. And I do it. I do the dusting. And those platforms need dusting in the shelves about every other day. And it's not bad, but you use a Swiffer People don't touch, please. If it's fingerprinted, you take ammonia-free Windex and a cloth, unused baby diaper. The Seattle guys brought me a whole stack, and I used that. But it does get dusty, and you just work on it every few days and hold your breath.
I asked that question to my wife.
Swiffer.
How fragile is that?
You know, it's very, very fragile. All the vessels, you'd think that they aren't that bad to handle, but even the Seattle guys who handle them all the time said that they even hate touching the little ones, and that they're almost more nervous about those than the chandelier components. All of that ornamentation, you can't grab it. It's fused on there and it's firm, but if you grab anything by the handles, and that's an art museum thing, we don't pick up chairs by handles either or anything like that, but you have to, you know, walk like this, know your path. It's very fragile. The chandelier, I was told to expect breakage while they're putting it together. If you use the firm in Seattle or Chihuly Studio for installation, if anything breaks, then Chihuly Studio will replace it. But those pieces created on the island of Murano are irreplaceable. So there you have that. They really help you sleep at night. They did not break anything while they were in Oshkosh. However, the tip, those horns and ribbons have holes, and then they go on the spike. And when they're trying to work it in there and there's glass all around the spike, they did break a teeny little shard off, but it's still usable, but they do have some extras. And they asked what to do with the shard of glass, thinking usually you save all those pieces, like if it's a piece off a gilt frame. And they said, oh, just toss it in the trash. I said, oh, I'm not going to do that. It's the one and only Chihuly glass piece I will ever own. So it's sitting on my desk. But it traveled in enormous boxes, nestled in foam, and it really is unbelievable.
We have time for one more question. Has to be a good one.
All right, just shout it out.
Well, this isn't exactly a question, but we went to the new museum in St. Petersburg.
Mhm.
And one of the
Oh,
things
yeah.
that really interested me on the tour, of course, it's quite a small museum, but it was wonderful. If you love Chihuly, you've seen quite a bit of it. Is that they stress the fact that Chihuly came because to him the lighting was as important as the installation.
Mhm.
And I found that very interesting.
It
So
is.
everything was lighted just
Lighted
perfect.
just right. And you know what? Everybody's been telling me about St. Petersburg, and they said that they do have barriers there. But Chihuly would not like that at all. He doesn't like the boxes on anything or the ropes or the stanchions, so it's all out there. So if you come, don't be dismayed when our security staff at the desk issues the friendly reminder of keep a foot away from the glass objects.
Laura will take questions
Yes.
up front. We're going to close now, but I'd like you to move your chairs to that end of the room and stack them.
And be sure to look for any hidden Post-it notes